Blitzball is bad, and Square Enix should feel bad for making it.
Blatantly broken minigame that was poorly thought out in both mechanics and lore.
If you've been on the internet at any point in the last couple of decades and looked up anything remotely related to Blitzball, you'll see a community divided. Some saying that it's the best thing since the invention of the wheel, and some rioting at the simple mention of the unique minigame. Sure, you have stuff like Triple Triad and the Golden Saucer, but none of them have had such an impact on the community like this watery wonder. However, the community and the commentary are only half the story here. As a matter of fact, Blitzball is probably the greatest thing that could have happened to Final Fantasy X, and thankfully the world was able to see it, because it almost didn't happen in the way we know it today. About 56% of you have a neutral or negative disposition in regards to the game, so let me show you Blitzball in a different light. Final Fantasy producer Yoshinori Kitase mentioned in an interview with Game Informer back in 2019 that he developed Blitzball for mostly his own enjoyment, and it was meant to be a secret minigame that was off the beaten path, similar to the 15 puzzle game in Final Fantasy I. It was only later that it became required to play in order to progress the main story, with Kitase's love child of water polo and soccer being integrated as a major part of the game's design, at least for the first half of the game. We see many obvious and not so obvious ways that the writing and direction really built the excitement around the sport. Many will go to the cheering fans at the beginning of the story, or the FMV that plays after reaching Zanarkand's Blitzball Dome as a prime example. But personally, the one that strikes myself as the most important is from the announcer Zanar, while Titus is running to the big game down the highway.
I was in a coffee shop running away from home when I heard the news. Our hero, checked, gone, vanished into thin air. My dad must have been his biggest fan. I knew how sad he'd be. Heck, we all were that day. Zanar, I says to myself, what are you thinking? I went running straight back home. We sat up talking about Jack all night. My dad and I never talked so much. Whoa, didn't mean to reminisce, folks.
The impact that Blitzball had on Zanar's family as a source of bonding and entertainment really shows in how Jet's disappearance made him so emotional that he returned home and talked with his father all night. Given the popularity of the sport, it's safe to assume that most families have this as a major part of their normal lives. From here, the player can start to understand that it's not just a game, but rather the culture that encompasses the entirety of Zanarkand. According to the interview mentioned earlier, this all makes sense as they intended for the player to have a lot more time in Zanarkand with the original plotline, so there was probably a lot of personality fleshed out for what the civilization is really about. After taking a wild ride out of Zanarkand with Sin, we start to see the Blitzball phenomenon that was in Zanarkand transcending time itself, with it being mentioned by Riku on the Albed salvage ship, and being a major part of the lifestyle of nearly a fourth of Besaid's villagers with the Besaid Aurochs. I'll touch a little bit more on Riku's scene later, but for now I want to look into one of the Aurochs' main motivations. Despite being a team that never really won a game, the game's importance to them as a distraction from Sin and the constant threat of the world's destruction is what truly kept them going. This distraction concept is pretty important, so pay attention. This is confirmed during a short cutscene later in Kilika, when Titus questions Wakka's unwavering desire to keep praying for victory, despite the entire village being decimated. Talking to some of the Kilika beasts will give similar insight, as they believe they have to win, no matter what. I don't want to get too ahead of myself, so looking more into Besaid, and honestly almost every other town and city in the game, I feel like it's akin to small towns in the Midwest and southern United States. You know, the ones that put their entire town's budget into the high school football team and their church. Blitzball and Yevon are the people's lifeblood, and have been for what seems to be 1,000 years after Bavel yoinked Zanarkand's culture. We get a little more insight as to what Blitzball means to some of these people, especially children, when talking with the villagers. Volcha's son, while conflicted with joining the Aurochs or Crusaders, embodies what we learn about Wakka and Chappu as their time in the village comes to a close, with Wakka starting blitzing at 5 years old and joining the Aurochs at 13, and Chappu joining the Crusaders when coming of age. What seems to be a simple crossroads for this child becomes highlighted as a life or death decision when it comes down to it. Wow, that got deep, huh? I'll talk more about the Crusaders later on, but it's really interesting how there are these two major forces that have influence in Spira outside the Church of Yevon itself. The sport that distracts and entertains, and the force that seemingly protects and defends. This elevates Blitzball to an even bigger importance in the world, because it has the false reality of being free from Spira's infamous spiral of death, unlike its Crusader and Summoner counterparts. Before we leave Besaid, after the bonfire sequence with one of Final Fantasy X's most famous lines, Tidus has a dream that reveals his true feelings about the father everyone considers a legend. While his mother won't be mentioned much here, Jet is clearly at the top of this abusive power dynamic within the trio. Though he is wildly successful in Blitzball, he seems to be constantly drinking and emotionally abusing his son through berating and name-calling. This is later revealed to be sort of a misguided way to make his own son try harder and to become a better man than him, which is almost exactly what Tidus does with his Blitzball career. This concept is actually shown in many different types of media, my personal favorite being in Futurama with Fry and his father Yancey. In the episode Cold Warriors, Yancey mentions that he's so hard on Fry all the time due to his desire to push him to be stronger and be a better man than he could ever be. Without Blitzball, I don't think that Jet would have ended up much different than where he was at this point, as I believe he would have found something else to excel at and have it feed his ego to the point of where he was, thus still leaving Tidus hating his father from his childhood onward. I do, however, appreciate that Blitzball was the focus of making their relationship what it was, and anything else honestly would not have done it justice for the story. Leaving Besaid behind and taking a look at Kilika Island, I mentioned earlier that even the total destruction of the seaside village couldn't keep the Blitzers from committing to the championship happening in Luca. Another reason for this, besides the case of suppressing the pain of loss with the sport, could be because of the influence from a High Summoner long ago. High Summoner O'Holland not only brought the calm about 230 years before Tidus arrived in Spira, but he was a legendary Blitzball champion who played for the Kilika Beasts, which explains all the statues and scenery that honor him on the island. At his peak, he would train at the top of the mountain near the temple to hone his skills. Maybe if the Aurochs trained more intensely in the hills that Besaid had to offer, instead of chilling on the beach, it might have won a tournament or two before Tidus showed up to bail him out. Heck, even those waterfalls on the back of the island would have done some good. Unfortunately, while that would make for some really cool character development, this is a retrospective video and not a light Blitzball fanfic novel, so beach training is all you get. In an alternate universe, 1 like equals 1 training montage scene, so like the video if you want Waka to practice Venom shots for all of eternity and become a Giga Chad who will defeat the goers in every single match. Back to my main point here, having a High Summoner as a Blitzball champion really solidifies how ingrained the sport is with all of Spira. It was mentioned that it's basically the only form of entertainment to distract from Sin's destruction, but it really hammers the point I talked about earlier with it being so infused with not only Xanarkin's culture, but now adopted as Spira's as well. Moving forward past the Sin Spawn fight, we reach another major conflict point with the Luca goers showing up in person, the team that has been sweeping the competition year after year. I would probably say the second biggest motivation for the Aurochs to win is to overcome how absolutely small the goers make them feel here. Dado's words right after the confrontation confirm this, as his knees were literally shaking during the whole ordeal. Looking back to our main protagonist, Tidus takes this very personally, as this is the exact same behavior that would come from Jet, acting like he's better than everyone else, and just straight up being a bully to others beneath him. We hear this during the main cutscene where he actually says,
"Putting people down? They're as bad as my old man."
At this point, let's slow down for a minute. If you're playing this game for the first time, this is probably where your anticipation for Blitzball is at its highest. Seeing how exciting the game is in cutscenes, realizing how much Xanarkin and Spira require Blitzball to function as a society, and of course, having the knowledge that your main protagonist is a legend in his own right. The goers really lit a fire under me personally, and I knew I was ready to take them down the moment the cutscene happened. However, I don't think I realized that I would actually be playing Blitzball until leaving Kilika and starting the SS Winnow sequence of events. After more dialogue and small scenes, Tidus confronts his inner demon that is the Jet Shot. The minigame here is quite simple, but it does give us another insight as to what was drilled into Tidus's head as a kid. All of these voices are out in the open for us as he's performing the combo into the Jet Shot.
You're out of your league. No you can't do it. I'm the best. You can't.
As the player, we don't think much of it at the time, but honestly it makes you wonder, just how long have these voices been screaming at him internally? We have some reason to believe it's actually been quite some time. Thanks to the dream he had earlier in Besaid, it was so intense for him that he woke up yelling,
I hate you!
So at least when it came to Blitzball, this was something that was bothering him for a long time, and thus, overcoming this beast was probably an incredible victory for Tidus. Personally, I didn't win the first time because I got confused as to how the minigame worked, I know there's a tutorial right before it, but look, I was like 11 years old and sheltered. Luckily, I had the sense to save about 10 minutes or so before then, so when I realized I lost, I just tried again until I got it. When you get the jet shot learned pop up on the screen, I think that's when it really sank in that I'm either going to use this in battle, or I'm actually going to be playing Blitzball in some way. I've never been too big on sports, but this underwater soccer, water polo, football, whatever it actually is, interested me. And it still gets me excited to this day, because the build up to the next scene is masterfully done. The SS Winnow approaching Luca cutscene is probably one of my favorite FMV experiences in this game, and it wouldn't have existed without Blitzball being as integrated in the story as it was. You were able to see the scale of the stadium and technology in Zanarkand, but from what has been seen in Spira so far, the simplicity of life overall makes it seem like a completely different world. Fortunately, or unfortunately, it depends on how you look at it, I guess, Bevel yoinked this when Zanarkand was destroyed and was like, hey, you all can't use Machina, but here's a list of stuff you can use in a big stadium, now shoo and go play. This is where everything comes together with Blitzball. Excitement is at its highest with all of the teams coming through, and it finally sinks in that everyone in Spira is looking to enjoy this event somehow, including the Maesters of Yevon. Not just that, but there's representation from pretty much every corner of Spira, even the Al Bhed. Apparently Orion's here too, but we'll cover that in just a bit. The fact that despite this event is being sponsored by Yevon, and the Al Bhed are still being allowed to participate, goes to show that Blitzball continues to transcend the religion itself. In a game that is so set on its themes of death, faith, and hard work to overcome adversity, Luca is probably the happiest you ever see the general populace in the game. Almost no one is thinking about the destruction Sin just brought to Kilika, except for maybe the Aurochs and the Beast, and these people want to let themselves be free of worry and cheer on their favorite teams in blind excitement. Unfortunately, this excitement leaves Yuna and her guardians at their most vulnerable. The Al Bhed Sykes end up abducting Yuna and only offer her return upon the Aurochs' loss of their Blitzball match. We've seen some drama before this, but I think this is the first instance where Blitzball gives us a real enemy and not just something to get us excited about the game itself. We see this theme pop up more throughout the game, actually coming to a head in the final battle with Jet and his ultimate jet shot ability. Yep, I said it here. Everything begins and ends with Blitzball, and I'm perfectly okay with that. Of course, in the Al Bhed's case, they don't have something as cool as an ultimate jet shot, so they give us an oversized pitching machine that throws Blitzballs at the party. We see this right after the Blitzball match as well, with fiends attacking the stadium and our players. Don't worry, I'll talk about the minigame later, but I want to talk about a more important topic first. I think this is where Yevon is at its most nefarious. The player doesn't know it yet, but the entire Blitzball tournament and hype around it seems to be another one of Yevon's tools for control. So much for being free of that spiral of death, I guess. Remember that distraction from sin concept I've been talking about? Yevon is great at exploiting this to distract from their own true motives. One specific NPC later on says it outright. Fiend attack? So what? Big deal. Everyone will forget about it soon and occupy themselves with Blitzball. The introduction of Micah and Seymour was timed perfectly around this event, and it needed to happen now to make the biggest impact on the story. With it being revealed later that the Guado have the uncanny ability to summon fiends at will due to their overwhelming control of Fireflies, and the reasons being confirmed by Square Enix, we know that the Luca Fiend attack was manipulation of public optics at its finest. We can see that in some of the dialogue from different NPCs after the attack. Who knows what would have happened if Maester Seymour hadn't been there? Maester Seymour is our savior. Maester Seymour was only known as the son of Jiskel, and didn't really have a legacy to his name besides that. To dispel any doubt and earn the trust of the people, Yevon used the event that everyone in Spira was going to watch in order to confirm Seymour in the eyes of the public. This not only earned their trust, but provided enough reason for them to not question Yevon when trying to figure out where the fiends actually came from. Yevon is pure evil, and no one sees it right now, except for maybe Titus. We all had that feeling that Seymour was bad whenever we first played the game. Honestly though, I just thought his hairs and eyes looked really cool, and the first thing I was thinking back then was that I wanted to play as this guy. I got my wish a little bit later, and I was the happiest kid on the planet for like 3 minutes. Okay, back to the actual topic before I lose myself in nostalgia. The whole tournament sequence is a perfect climax of one of our 2 sub-stories actively playing out at the moment, and gave us a glimpse beyond the veil into what the story is really about. The lightheartedness of the early game prior to the tournament starts to fade, and we're reminded of the cataclysm in Zanarkand with the attack on Lucas Stadium. Speaking of that, Orin is here, and this is where things start to get pretty interesting. With Titus and Orin's history together, Orin knew that this was the place he was going to find them after coming back to Spira. This not only defines our main character as being predictable in a way, but it also demonstrates that once again Blitzball has this tendency to bring people together in this story. This works so well that I don't think they could have made this work any other way. Even on the Al Bhed salvage ship with Riku, we knew early on we were Luca bound. After completing the tournament and reuniting with Orin, Blitzball takes a bit of a backseat as the main plotline and becomes featured as a minigame accessible at almost any point via a save sphere. Now at this point, the world building and exposition is pretty much done, with the only characters needing development falling outside of the scope of Blitzball itself. However, if we push forward past Operation Mi'ihen and the death of many Crusaders in Al Bhed, there's a little bit more to be seen before approaching the Moonflow and beyond. This is where Yevon is prepared to deal with the fallout of losing so many Crusader lives in the front, replacing the guards lost in Luca with warrior monks in Guado by the order of Maester Keenock and Maester Seymour. They realize that the entertainment the city brings will not be enough to keep things quiet. Only one or two NPCs outside of the Blitzers really mention anything to do with the game, and it's just a desire to hold a tournament in honor of the Crusaders. This kind of goes beyond the reach of just Blitzball and honestly deserves its own video, but here you truly start to see the police state that Yevon creates when the populace begins to question what's going on. This isn't needed for the island settlements because they're so isolated from the mainland and don't seem to pose any threat, but their oppression can be seen everywhere in Luca. Okay, I'm at the part where I talk about what people don't actually like. I avoided talking about this in bigger detail because honestly it doesn't have much bearing on the game itself. Well, besides the grind to get Wakka's really cool celestial weapon, you're only required to play literally one game, and it doesn't affect the story in any meaningful way. With that being said, the deep mechanics, the hook of wanting to get better at the minigame if you don't know how to play, or the grind the heck out of it if you do, and many other things that honestly make it super addicting whether you like it or not. I honestly think the game is great, but unfortunately I feel like it falls under a product of its time situation, where it may not have aged well for many people. However, it's nice to just mindlessly grind out games when going for Wakka's most powerful weapon, or if you have some downtime and want to grind some of your favorite characters. At the end of the day, it's interesting to see how much Blitzball actually influences the game as a whole. What started as an idea for a hidden game, turned into an in-game cultural phenomenon that made Final Fantasy X the gem it is today. Say what you will about it, but Blitzball represents a masterclass of world building and storytelling. Really quick, I'm new to making this type of content, so if you made it this far into my oddly structured rambling, I very much appreciate it. Head into the comments section below to let me know if you want to see more videos like this. I really just enjoy going over some of these finer details in games that I really enjoyed as a kid. As always though, stay hydrated folks, and thanks for watching.